I caught my husband, Dr. Marcus Blackwood, researching fatal drug interactions on his laptop at 2 a.m., cross-referencing my prescription medications with a list of accidental overdose scenarios. He thought I was asleep upstairs, but I was standing in the shadows of our kitchen doorway, watching the man I'd trusted with my life plan my death with clinical precision. What Marcus didn't know was that the $2.3 million inheritance he was counting on had already vanished from our joint accounts. By morning, the hunter would become the hunted, and the brilliant cardiologist would discover that his supposedly naive wife had been playing a much longer game. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 4 days. That's how long it's been since I learned that my husband of 12 years, the respected Dr. Marcus Blackwood of Riverside Memorial Hospital in Millbrook Heights, had been meticulously planning what he called my tragic medication error. Since I discovered that the man who took an oath to do no harm had been calculating the exact dosage that would kill me while making it look like an innocent mistake with my heart medication. Before we dive into how I outsmarted a man who thought his medical degree made him untouchable, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this story of betrayal and revenge grips you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because tomorrow I have something even more shocking that will leave you questioning everyone you trust. I'm Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood, and until 4 days ago, I thought my biggest challenge was managing my cardiology practice while dealing with the stress-induced heart condition that had developed after my father's sudden death 6 months ago. I'm 38 years old, a successful interventional cardiologist at Millbrook General Hospital, and I believed I was living the perfect life with my brilliant husband in our sprawling colonial home in the prestigious Elmhurst district. Marcus and I had met during our residency at Johns Hopkins 15 years ago. He was the golden boy, charming, brilliant, from a wealthy Connecticut family with a long line of physicians. I was the scholarship kid from Sacramento, driven and determined to prove myself in the male-dominated world of cardiology. Our love story had been the stuff of medical school legends, two ambitious doctors who found in each other not just romance, but intellectual partnership and shared dreams of building something extraordinary together. For 12 years, that dream seemed to be our reality. We'd both established thriving practices, purchased our dream home, and built what everyone considered the perfect marriage. Marcus specialized in cardiac surgery, while I focused on interventional procedures. We often joked that between us, we could fix any heart, literally and figuratively. Our colleagues at Millbrook Heights medical community respected us both individually and as a power couple who seemed to have it all figured out. The cracks began to show 6 months ago when my father, David Chen, died suddenly of a massive heart attack. Dad had been my anchor, my biggest supporter, and the man who'd sacrificed everything to put me through medical school. His death hit me harder than I'd expected, triggering a stress-induced cardiac condition that required daily medication to manage irregular heartbeats and blood pressure fluctuations. Marcus had been incredibly supportive during those dark months, taking over more of the household responsibilities, managing my medication schedule, and even suggesting I take a temporary leave from some of my more demanding cases. His attentiveness had felt like love. Now I understood it was surveillance, preparation, and planning. The inheritance from my father's estate was substantial, $2.3 million from his successful engineering consulting firm and real estate investments. It was money I'd never expected, wealth that transformed our financial picture overnight. Marcus had seemed genuinely pleased about our good fortune, suggesting we use it to expand both our practices, maybe even open a joint cardiovascular center that would cement our legacy in Millbrook Heights medical community. What I didn't tell Marcus was that something about his enthusiasm felt wrong. Call it intuition, call it professional paranoia from years of making life-and-death decisions, but I'd started to notice inconsistencies in his behavior. the way he'd hover when I took my medications, how he'd started preparing my pill organizer himself, claiming he wanted to help manage my stress, the careful questions about my will and our financial arrangements that he framed as practical planning, but felt oddly urgent. So I'd made a decision that probably saved my life. 3 months ago, I quietly moved the entire inheritance into a separate account under my maiden name, Dr. Sophia Chen. I told myself it was just a precaution, a way to maintain some financial independence while I processed my grief. I created the account at First National Bank of Millbrook, an institution where Marcus had no connections, and I'd been slowly, carefully, moving additional assets there as well. Marcus knew nothing about this account. As far as he was concerned, the $2.3 million was sitting in our joint investment portfolio, ready to fund our expanded practices and secure our future. He had no idea that his carefully planned murder for inheritance money was actually a murder for nothing. That Tuesday, night changed everything. I'd gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion from a particularly challenging procedure that day. But something had been nagging at me, a patient's case that reminded me uncomfortably of my own symptoms, and a conversation I'd overheard between Marcus and his colleague, Dr. Richard Steele, about medication errors that seemed oddly specific and theoretical. I'd come downstairs for some herbal tea, hoping to calm my anxiety enough to sleep, when I saw the glow of Marcus's laptop screen. In his study, the door was slightly ajar, and what I saw through that crack shattered not just my marriage, but my understanding of the man I'd shared my life with for over a decade. Marcus wasn't just researching drug interactions. He had created a detailed spreadsheet titled Medication Protocol, SC, with my initials. The document contained my complete medical history, current prescriptions, and what appeared to be calculated dosages of various medications that, when combined, would create what any coroner would rule as an accidental overdose of heart medication. He'd been planning this for months. Every solicitous gesture, every offer to manage my medications, every concerned question about my health had been part of a systematic plan to kill me and inherit money that no longer existed. As I stood there in the shadows, watching my husband plan my murder with the same methodical precision he used to plan complex cardiac surgeries, I felt something shift inside me. The grief-stricken, vulnerable woman he thought he was manipulating died in that moment. What remained was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than Dr. Marcus Blackwood could have imagined. Because while he'd been planning my death, I'd been unconsciously planning his downfall. And tomorrow, the real game would begin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me tell you who I really am, because understanding my background is crucial to comprehending how I was able to turn the tables on someone who thought he knew me completely. I'm Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood, 38 years old, and I didn't get to where I am by being naive or trusting blindly. I'm one of only 12 female interventional cardiologists in the entire state of Connecticut, a specialty that requires not just medical expertise, but nerves of steel and the ability to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. When someone's heart is failing on my operating table, I don't have the luxury of hesitation or self-doubt. My path to medicine wasn't paved with privilege like Marcus's was. I grew up in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Sacramento, the daughter of David Chen, a brilliant mechanical engineer who immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but his education and an unshakable belief in the American dream. My mother, Elena, worked double shifts as a registered nurse to help put me through school. They sacrificed everything for my education, and I learned early that success required not just intelligence, but strategic thinking and careful planning. In medical school, while my classmates were partying or studying in groups, I was working part-time jobs and developing what my professors called an unusual attention to detail. I had to be better than everyone else just to be considered equal. This meant I became exceptionally good at reading people, understanding motivations, and anticipating outcomes, skills that served me well in medicine and, as it turned out, in marriage. My specialty in interventional cardiology requires a unique combination of surgical precision and diagnostic intuition. I perform complex procedures using catheters and imaging technology to repair hearts without open surgery. It's minimally invasive but incredibly technical work that demands absolute focus and the ability to remain calm under pressure. I've saved hundreds of lives by catching problems other doctors missed, by noticing subtle patterns in test results, and by trusting my instincts when something didn't feel right. This professional hypervigilance had always been an asset, but it had also made me somewhat paranoid in my personal life. I noticed things others missed: changes in body language, inconsistencies in stories, patterns that didn't quite add up. Marcus used to tease me about my detective brain, saying I approached our relationship like a medical case study. He thought it was charming. I now realize it terrified him. Financially, I've always been more conservative and strategic than Marcus realized. While he came from old money and had always had a safety net, I'd grown up understanding that financial security required careful planning and multiple contingencies. Even after we married and combined our finances, I maintained certain independent accounts and investments. Not because I didn't trust Marcus, but because my father had taught me that a woman should always be able to take care of herself. My relationship with money became even more cautious after witnessing several colleagues go through devastating divorces that left them financially ruined despite their successful careers. I'd seen too many brilliant women discover that their physician husbands had been hiding assets or manipulating their shared finances. So while I appeared to be completely transparent with Marcus about our joint accounts, I'd always maintained some degree of financial independence. This caution intensified after my father's death 6 months ago. Dad had been my closest confidant and advisor, the person who'd taught me to think 3 moves ahead in every situation. Losing him had left me feeling vulnerable in ways I'd never experienced. The stress triggered cardiac issues that required daily medication, beta blockers for blood pressure, antiarrhythmic drugs for irregular heartbeats, and blood thinners to prevent clotting. Having a heart condition as a cardiologist is particularly ironic and somewhat embarrassing. I understood exactly what was happening to my body, could interpret every test result and symptom, but I couldn't prevent the emotional stress from manifesting physically. It was a humbling reminder that medical knowledge doesn't make you immune to the very conditions you treat in others. Marcus's response to my health issues had seemed perfectly supportive. He'd insisted on managing my medication schedule, claiming that I was too stressed to keep track of complex dosing requirements. He'd researched my condition extensively, asking detailed questions about drug interactions and side effects. At the time, I'd attributed this to his natural caretaker instincts and his own medical expertise. What I didn't fully appreciate was how my condition had changed the power dynamic in our relationship. For the first time in our marriage, I was the vulnerable one, the patient rather than the physician. Marcus had seized this opportunity to position himself as my protector and caregiver, a role that gave him unprecedented access to my medical care and daily routine. But here's what Marcus never understood about me. Even when I'm vulnerable, even when I'm grieving, even when I'm sick, I'm still a physician trained to notice patterns and trust my instincts. And my instincts had been screaming that something was wrong for weeks before I caught him planning my murder. The inheritance from my father's estate had been both a blessing and a complication. $2.3 million was life-changing money, enough to expand our practices, secure our retirement, or fund the cardiovascular research center we'd always dreamed of building. But it also represented something deeper. My father's life's work, his legacy, and his final gift to ensure I'd always be financially secure. Marcus's enthusiasm about the inheritance had felt slightly off from the beginning. While I was grieving my father's death, he was already making plans for how we'd use the money. His suggestions were always framed as our dreams and our future, but there was an urgency to his planning that didn't match my emotional state. That's when I made the decision that would ultimately save my life. 3 months ago, I'd quietly transferred the entire inheritance to a separate account at First National Bank of Millbrook, using only my maiden name, Dr. Sophia Chen. I told myself it was temporary, just until I was emotionally ready to make major financial decisions. I didn't tell Marcus because I wasn't ready to explain my need for this financial independence while I was still processing my grief. The account had grown since then. I'd been gradually moving other assets there, dividends from investments Marcus didn't know about, income from consulting work I did independently, and money I'd saved from my practice over the years. By the time I discovered Marcus's murder plan, the secret account contained nearly $2.8 million. Marcus thought he was planning to inherit $2.3 million from a wife who trusted him completely. In reality, he was planning to murder someone who had already outmaneuvered him financially and was about to demonstrate that underestimating Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood was the last mistake he'd ever make. Looking back now, I can see how carefully Marcus had constructed what I thought was our perfect life together. But at the time, everything felt genuinely wonderful, which is what made his betrayal so devastating and his plan so nearly successful. Our daily routine in Millbrook Heights had the rhythm of a well-choreographed dance. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., I'd wake to the smell of freshly brewed Ethiopian coffee, Marcus's one indulgence from his undergraduate years studying abroad. He'd always been an early riser, claiming that the quiet morning hours were when his mind was sharpest for reviewing complex surgical cases. I'd find him in his study, already dressed in his perfectly pressed scrubs, reviewing patient files with the same methodical attention he brought to everything in his life. We'd share breakfast on our sun-drenched back terrace, overlooking the meticulously maintained garden that Marcus tended with the same precision he brought to cardiac surgery. The morning routine was sacred to us, 30 minutes where we'd discuss our schedules, share interesting cases, and plan our evenings together. Marcus would always ask about my patient load, showing genuine interest in the complex interventional procedures I had scheduled. He'd offer insights from his surgical experience, and I'd provide perspectives from my diagnostic work. It felt like true partnership. Our home at 847 Elmhurst Drive was everything we'd dreamed of when we were struggling residents eating ramen noodles and sharing a studio apartment near Johns Hopkins. The colonial-style house sat on 2 acres of prime Connecticut real estate, with tall windows that flooded every room with natural light and original hardwood floors that gleamed like honey. Marcus had insisted on the house when it came on the market 3 years ago, saying it represented everything we'd worked for and deserved. The master bedroom suite was Marcus's pride and joy, a spacious retreat with a sitting area where we'd often review medical journals together, a walk-in closet that could accommodate both our professional wardrobes, and a bathroom with a soaking tub where I'd unwind after particularly challenging procedures. Marcus had personally selected every fixture, every paint color, every piece of furniture. At the time, I'd found his attention to detail touching. Now I understood he'd been creating the perfect setting for my eventual demise. Professionally, we were both at the peak of our careers. Marcus was the youngest department head in Riverside Memorial Hospital's history, having been promoted to chief of cardiac surgery at just 41 years old. His colleagues respected his innovative surgical techniques and his ability to handle the most complex cases with calm precision. Patients specifically requested him for high-risk procedures, and his success rates were among the best in the region. My own practice at Millbrook General Hospital had grown steadily over the past 5 years. Interventional cardiology was still a relatively new field, and being one of the few women specializing in these complex catheter-based procedures had made me something of a local celebrity in medical circles. I performed procedures that other cardiologists couldn't handle, removing blood clots from blocked arteries, repairing heart valves without open surgery, and inserting devices that could save lives in minutes rather than hours. Our social life, revolved around the tight-knit community of Millbrook Heights medical professionals. Every Friday night, we'd attend dinner parties hosted by colleagues, where conversations flowed seamlessly between shop talk about challenging cases and discussions of vacation plans, investment strategies, and the latest medical research. Marcus was always the charming center of attention, telling stories that made everyone laugh while demonstrating his extensive knowledge of wine and fine dining. We'd hosted these gatherings ourselves at least once a month, with Marcus personally preparing elaborate meals that showcased his culinary skills, another talent he'd developed during his privileged upbringing. He'd spend days planning menus, selecting wines, and preparing dishes that would impress our guests. I'd handle the social coordination and ambiance, but Marcus was always the star of these events, holding court in our gourmet kitchen while preparing multiple courses with restaurant-quality presentation. Weekend mornings were reserved for our shared passion for cycling. We'd joined the Millbrook Heights Cycling Club 2 years ago, and every Saturday at 7 a.m., we'd meet with a group of 12 other couples for rides through the scenic countryside surrounding our community. Marcus had insisted we invest in top-of-the-line racing bikes, saying that our professional success demanded equipment that matched our status. These rides had become some of my favorite times, just the two of us and our friends, enjoying physical challenge and natural beauty away from the demands of our medical practices. Evenings were typically quiet and domestic. Marcus would prepare dinner while I caught up on medical journals or responded to consultation requests from other physicians. We'd eat by candlelight in our formal dining room, discussing our days and planning upcoming vacation trips. Marcus was always encouraging about my career ambitions, suggesting conferences I should attend and research opportunities I should pursue. He seemed genuinely proud of my professional achievements and supportive of my goals. Our financial life appeared completely transparent and collaborative. We maintained joint checking and savings accounts, shared investment portfolios, and made all major financial decisions together. Marcus handled most of the day-to-day money management, claiming that his analytical mind was better suited to tracking expenses and optimizing our investments. I trusted his judgment completely, especially since our net worth had grown steadily under his management. The intimacy in our marriage felt genuine and deeply satisfying. Marcus was an attentive and considerate partner, always prioritizing my comfort and pleasure. We'd maintained physical and emotional closeness despite the demands of our careers, making time for regular date nights and spontaneous romantic gestures. He'd leave sweet notes in my medical bag, surprise me with flowers delivered to the hospital, and plan thoughtful celebrations for my professional achievements. Even my health issues had seemed to bring us closer together. When the stress-induced cardiac condition developed after my father's death, Marcus had immediately taken charge of my care with touching devotion. He'd researched my condition extensively, consulted with specialist colleagues, and insisted on managing my medication schedule to ensure I didn't miss doses while dealing with grief and work pressure. Every morning, he'd prepare my pills in a weekly organizer, carefully arranging the different medications according to the precise timing my cardiologist had prescribed. He'd remind me to take my evening doses, bring me water when I seemed to forget, and monitor my symptoms with the keen eye of a physician who genuinely cared about my well-being. When I expressed frustration about having heart problems as a cardiologist, he'd reassure me that stress-induced conditions were temporary and treatable. Our shared circle of friends had often commented on how lucky we were to have found each other. Two successful physicians who seemed to complement each other perfectly, both personally and professionally. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, my closest friend from residency, would often joke that Marcus and I represented the gold standard for medical marriages, having achieved the rare balance of individual career success and genuine partnership. The medical community in Millbrook Heights was small enough that everyone knew everyone, but large enough to provide diverse social opportunities and professional networking. Marcus and I were often invited to speak at medical conferences as an example of how dual physician marriages could thrive. We'd developed a presentation about maintaining work-life balance in high-stress medical careers that we delivered at 3 different professional conferences over the past 2 years. This was the life Marcus was planning to destroy for money. This was the partnership he was willing to murder for an inheritance that no longer existed. Every moment of apparent love and care had been a performance. Every gesture of support had been manipulation. And every shared dream had been a lie, designed to position me for the perfect crime. The most chilling realization was understanding how long he must have been planning this. The medication management, the financial discussions, the increased life insurance policies he'd suggested we purchase for security. It had all been preparation for my murder. Marcus had been living with me, sleeping beside me, making love. To me, all while calculating the exact method and timing of my death. But Marcus had made one critical miscalculation in his perfect plan. He'd assumed that the grieving, vulnerable woman he thought he was manipulating would remain passive and trusting until the very end. He had no idea that Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood had been unconsciously preparing her own contingency plans and that his perfect victim was about to become his most dangerous adversary. The evening that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in our perfect Millbrook Heights routine. I'd finished a particularly challenging procedure that afternoon, inserting a stent in the widowmaker artery of a 52-year-old construction worker named Tony Ramirez. It was the kind of case that reminded me why I'd chosen interventional cardiology. The difference between life and death often came down to millimeters of precision and split-second timing. Tony had arrived at Millbrook General in full cardiac arrest, his wife Elena clutching his hand in the ambulance while paramedics performed CPR. The emergency room team had managed to get his heart beating again, but the angiogram showed a complete blockage in his left anterior descending artery, the vessel. Cardiologists grimly call the widowmaker because blockages there are often fatal. I'd performed the emergency catheterization procedure, threading a tiny balloon and stent through his arterial system to restore blood flow to his damaged heart muscle. The procedure had taken 3 hours longer than usual due to complications from scar tissue and unusual anatomy. By the time I'd successfully placed the stent and confirmed that blood flow was restored, my own heart was racing from the adrenaline and stress. Tony would live to see his daughter's wedding next month, but the intensity of the case had left me physically and emotionally drained in ways that reminded me uncomfortably of my own cardiac vulnerability. I'd arrived home that evening around 8:30 p.m., later than usual, but not exceptionally so for a physician dealing with emergency cases. Marcus had texted me earlier to say he'd eaten dinner already but would prepare something light for me when I got home. This thoughtfulness was typical of our relationship. We both understood the unpredictable demands of medical practice and had learned to adapt our personal lives around patient care emergencies. The house was quiet when I entered through the garage, filled with the warm glow of carefully placed lighting that Marcus had spent months perfecting when we'd first moved in. I could hear the soft murmur of classical music coming from his study, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, which he often played while reviewing surgical cases or catching up on medical literature. The familiar sounds and scents of our home immediately began to ease the tension I'd been carrying since Tony Ramirez's case. Marcus appeared in the kitchen as I was hanging up my medical bag, looking handsome and relaxed in the navy blue sweater I'd given him for his birthday. He greeted me with a warm kiss and immediately began preparing the light dinner he'd promised. Grilled salmon with asparagus and wild rice, one of my favorite meals and something he knew would help me unwind after a stressful day. "Rough case today?" he asked, his voice filled with the genuine concern that had always made me feel so supported in our marriage. "You look exhausted, sweetheart." I told him about Tony Ramirez while he cooked, describing the technical challenges of the procedure and the emotional weight of holding someone's life in my hands. Marcus listened with the focused attention he always gave to my work stories, asking insightful questions about the surgical approach and offering perspectives from his own experience. With complex cardiac cases, this was one of the things I'd always loved most about our relationship, the ability to share the intense realities of our professional lives with someone who truly understood the stakes involved. After dinner, Marcus suggested I take a hot bath to help relax my stressed muscles while he cleaned up the kitchen. He'd already drawn the bath water, adding lavender salts that he knew would help ease both physical tension and mental anxiety. The attention to detail was so typically Marcus, anticipating my needs and taking care of details that would make my evening more restorative. I'd soaked in the tub for nearly an hour, letting the warm water and soothing scents wash away the intensity of the day. When I emerged, Marcus had laid out my favorite silk pajamas and had prepared my evening medications on the nightstand with a glass of filtered water. This nightly routine had become standard since my cardiac condition developed. Marcus insisted on organizing my pills to ensure I didn't accidentally miss doses while dealing with work stress and grief. "Take your medications, darling," he'd said, kissing my forehead gently. "Your heart rhythm has been irregular lately, and we can't afford to skip doses." I'd taken the pills without question, trusting completely in Marcus's medical knowledge and his care for my well-being. The medication regimen was complex: beta blockers taken twice daily, blood thinners that required precise timing, and antiarrhythmic drugs that needed to be spaced appropriately to avoid dangerous interactions. Marcus had studied my prescriptions carefully and had created a detailed schedule that optimized the effectiveness while minimizing side effects. By 10:30 p.m., I was feeling drowsy from both the exhausting day and the sedating effects of my cardiac medications. I'd kissed Marcus goodnight and headed upstairs to our bedroom, expecting to fall asleep quickly and deeply, as had become my pattern since starting the medication regimen. Marcus had remained downstairs, saying he wanted to review some surgical cases for tomorrow's procedures, a routine that was perfectly normal for both of us. But sleep wouldn't come. Despite my physical exhaustion, my mind kept replaying details from Tony Ramirez's case. Something about the complexity of his coronary anatomy reminded me of a research paper I'd read recently about unusual complications in stent placement procedures. The similarity was nagging at me, and I realized I needed to review the paper to ensure I hadn't missed any potential complications that might affect Tony's recovery. At 1:45 a.m., I quietly slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to my own study to retrieve the medical journal. Marcus's study light was still on, and I could hear the soft clicking of keyboard keys, which wasn't unusual since he often worked late preparing for complex surgeries or reviewing research for medical presentations he was frequently invited to give. As I passed his study door, which was slightly ajar, I glanced in to see if he might want some tea or coffee since we were both still awake. What I saw through that narrow opening stopped me cold and changed everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man I'd trusted with my heart. Marcus wasn't reviewing surgical cases. His laptop screen displayed a detailed spreadsheet with my name at the top: medication protocol, Sophia Chen Blackwood. Below my name were columns listing my current prescriptions, dosages, timing schedules, and what appeared to be calculated modifications that would create lethal drug interactions. But that wasn't the most horrifying part. Next to the spreadsheet, Marcus had multiple browser windows open. One showed a medical research database where he'd been searching for studies on accidental overdose scenarios and undetectable medication errors. Another displayed insurance websites where he'd been researching policies on accidental death benefits. A third showed real estate listings for properties far more expensive than anything we'd ever discussed purchasing. Marcus was researching how to kill me and make it look like an accident. The man who'd been lovingly managing my medications for months had been calculating the precise dosages that would cause a fatal heart arrhythmia that any coroner would attribute to my existing cardiac condition. Every pill he'd handed me, every concerned reminder about medication timing, every gesture of loving care had been part of a systematic plan to murder me for money he thought I had. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid Marcus might hear it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Discovering my husband's murder plot was triggering the exact kind of cardiac stress that could potentially kill me without his help. but through the shock and terror, my physician's training kicked in. I needed to gather information, document evidence, and understand the full scope of what Marcus had been planning. From my position in the darkened hallway, I could see that Marcus had been working on this for hours. Empty coffee cups and snack plates suggested he'd been researching murder methods for most of the evening, while I'd been relaxing in the bath and preparing for what I'd thought would be a peaceful night's sleep. The casual nature of his planning was almost more terrifying than the plan itself. He was approaching my murder with the same methodical precision he brought to surgical procedures. This wasn't a moment of desperate impulse or temporary insanity. This was calculated, premeditated murder disguised as medical care, planned by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate both medications and trust to achieve the perfect crime. Marcus wasn't just planning to kill me. He was planning to get away with it completely, inheriting our shared assets and probably receiving sympathy from our medical community for the tragic loss of his beloved wife to the cardiac condition he'd been so carefully monitoring. As I stood there in the darkness, watching my husband plan my death, I realized that the man I'd married had never really existed. The Marcus I'd loved was a carefully constructed facade designed to gain access to my trust, my assets, and ultimately my life. Every moment of our 12-year marriage had been a lie. Every gesture of love had been manipulation. And every shared dream had been part of an elaborate con game that was supposed to end with my death and his financial freedom. But Marcus had made one critical error in his planning. He'd assumed his victim would remain passive and trusting until the very end. He had no idea that Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood was about to become the most dangerous adversary he'd ever faced, and that his perfect crime was about to become his perfect downfall. Standing in that darkened hallway, I forced myself to remain motionless and silent while my medical training battled with the overwhelming urge to confront Marcus immediately. But years of emergency medicine had taught me that in life-threatening situations, gathering complete information before acting often meant the difference between saving a life and losing it. This was the most critical diagnosis of my career, and I needed to understand every detail before making my move. I positioned myself against the wall where the shadow from the staircase would hide me completely, giving me a clear view of Marcus's laptop screen while keeping me invisible from his position. What I observed over the next 45 minutes was more chilling than any medical emergency I'd ever handled. This wasn't just a murder plot. It was a masterpiece of premeditated killing designed by someone who understood both medicine and human psychology with terrifying precision. The spreadsheet on Marcus's screen was organized with the same meticulous attention to detail he brought to surgical planning. Under my name, he'd created columns for each of my current medications: metoprolol for blood pressure, warfarin for blood clotting prevention, flecainide for heart rhythm control, and atorvastatin for cholesterol management. But beside each medication, he'd added calculations that made my blood run cold. He'd researched the precise dosages that would create fatal interactions while appearing to be within normal therapeutic ranges to any cursory investigation. The warfarin dosage had been gradually increased beyond safe levels, something that would cause internal bleeding, but could easily be attributed to a dosing error or patient confusion. The flecainide timing had been modified to create a window where combining it with increased metoprolol would trigger a fatal arrhythmia that would look like a natural progression of my existing condition. What made the plan so diabolical was its medical sophistication. Any emergency room physician or coroner examining my death would see a clear progression of my known cardiac condition. The medications in my system would all be drugs I was legitimately prescribed. The dosages would appear to be within ranges that could result from patient error or prescription confusion. There would be no obvious signs of poisoning, no foreign substances, nothing that would trigger a homicide investigation, but the spreadsheet revealed even more disturbing details. Marcus had been tracking my daily stress levels, noting days when I seemed particularly tired or when my cardiac symptoms were more pronounced. He'd correlated these observations with optimal timing for what he clinically termed the intervention. The language was coldly medical, as if he were planning a therapeutic procedure rather than murder. In a separate document, I could see he'd been researching my work schedule for the past month, noting days when I had particularly challenging procedures or late-night emergency calls. He'd identified a pattern where I was most vulnerable. Evenings after complex interventional procedures when I was physically exhausted and emotionally drained, exactly like tonight. These were the times when my guard would be down and when medication errors would seem most plausible. The browser windows open on his laptop revealed the true scope of his planning. He'd been researching insurance policies not just for the accidental death benefits, but for specific language about medication, errors, and physician liability. One window showed a law firm's website specializing in medical malpractice defense. Apparently, Marcus was already planning how to deflect any potential scrutiny of my medical care. Another browser tab displayed real estate listings in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, properties worth millions of dollars that he'd apparently been planning to purchase after my death. He'd researched offshore banking procedures and tax shelters for large inheritance windfalls. This wasn't just about killing me for money. He'd been planning an entirely new life funded by my death. The medical research he'd compiled was staggeringly comprehensive. Marcus had studied case reports of medication errors in cardiac patients, autopsy findings from accidental overdoses, and legal precedents for investigating suspicious deaths in medical families. He'd identified the exact protocols that coroners and investigators would follow, and he'd designed his plan to exploit every weakness in the system. One document contained detailed notes about my personality traits and behavioral patterns that would support the accidental death narrative. He'd noted my tendency to work late when stressed, my occasional forgetfulness when overwhelmed, and my habit of sometimes taking medications at irregular times when dealing with emergency cases. These observations, which I'd thought demonstrated his loving attention to my well-being, were actually intelligence gathering for his murder plan. Marcus had even researched the specific investigators and medical examiners who would likely handle my case. He'd studied their backgrounds, their typical procedures, and their historical patterns in ruling on suspicious deaths. He'd identified which officials might be more thorough in their investigations, and had apparently planned to ensure my death occurred during periods when less experienced personnel would be handling the case. The financial planning was equally thorough. Marcus had calculated not just the immediate inheritance he expected, but the long-term value of my medical practice, our shared real estate investments, and the life insurance policies he'd encouraged me to purchase. He'd researched tax implications of inheritance versus life insurance proceeds, and he'd identified legal strategies for maximizing his financial benefit while minimizing scrutiny. But as I stood there absorbing the full scope of Marcus's betrayal, I began to notice something that made me smile grimly in the darkness. For all his medical expertise and meticulous planning, Marcus had made one fundamental error that would prove to be his complete undoing. Every financial calculation in his documents was based on assets that no longer existed where he thought they were. The $2.3 million inheritance from my father that formed the foundation of his murder plot was no longer in our joint accounts. The additional assets he'd been counting on, my practice equity, our investment portfolios, even the equity in our house, had been gradually moved to accounts he knew nothing about. Marcus was planning to commit the perfect murder for money that had already disappeared. But more importantly, he was planning to kill someone who now understood exactly who he was and what he was capable of. The brilliant, methodical Dr. Marcus Blackwood had unknowingly revealed his entire strategy to the one person who had both the knowledge to understand it completely and the resources to turn it against him. As I finally crept back upstairs, my mind was already racing with possibilities. Marcus thought he was hunting an unsuspecting victim. He had no idea he'd just shown his hand to someone who was about to become the most dangerous adversary he'd ever faced. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood was about to demonstrate that underestimating your victim is the most fatal mistake a predator can make. I made it back to our bedroom on legs that felt disconnected from my body, moving with the mechanical precision of someone in clinical shock. My hands were trembling so violently that I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself before slipping back into bed, beside the man who had been methodically planning my murder for over a year. The irony of lying next to Marcus while my heart pounded with dangerous irregularity wasn't lost on me. The stress of discovering his plot was triggering the exact cardiac symptoms he planned to exploit for my death. Every breath felt deliberate and forced as I lay there in the darkness, hyper-aware of Marcus's presence just inches away. I could hear his steady breathing, smell his familiar cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. The same body that had held me, comforted me, made love to me, all while harboring the cold calculation of a killer. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. This was the man who'd tenderly cared for me through my father's death, who'd researched my condition with apparent concern, who'd held my hand during my most vulnerable moments. Yet he'd been using that intimate knowledge to plan the perfect murder. My medical training kicked in as I recognized the physical symptoms of acute stress response flooding my system. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, muscle tension, and the familiar chest tightness that signaled my cardiac condition was being triggered by extreme emotional trauma. I needed to control my physiological response before it became dangerous, but the standard relaxation techniques felt impossible when lying next to someone who wanted me dead. The most terrifying aspect wasn't just the murder plot itself, it was the realization of how expertly I'd been manipulated. Every loving gesture, every concerned question about my health, every thoughtful accommodation Marcus had made during my illness had been strategic moves in a game I hadn't even known we were playing. The medication management I'd found so touching was actually him positioning himself to control the means of my death. The financial discussions I'd interpreted as partnership were him calculating the value of my life in dollars and cents. I found myself mentally reviewing every interaction from the past 6 months, searching for signs I should have noticed. The way Marcus had immediately volunteered to handle my medications when my condition developed. His insistence on organizing my pills personally rather than letting me use a pharmacy's automated packaging service. The subtle questions about my work schedule and stress levels that I'd thought showed caring attention, but now realized were intelligence gathering for optimal murder timing. The depth of his deception was staggering. Marcus hadn't just hidden his murderous intentions. He'd actively cultivated the very trust and dependency he planned to exploit. When I'd expressed frustration about having heart problems as a cardiologist, he'd positioned himself as my protector and caregiver. When I'd felt overwhelmed by my father's death and the inheritance complications, he'd offered to handle more of our financial management. Every vulnerability I'd shared had become a weapon in his arsenal. As I lay there processing the magnitude of his betrayal, I began to understand how he'd been psychologically conditioning me for months. The gradual increase in his control over my medications presented as loving concern. The subtle encouragement to work longer hours and take on more stressful cases, creating more opportunities for medication errors. The way he'd isolated me from some friendships by suggesting certain colleagues were too demanding of my time when I needed to focus on my health. Marcus had been systematically removing my support systems while positioning himself as my primary caregiver and protector. The friends who might have noticed changes in my behavior or questioned medication management decisions had been gradually excluded from our social circle through his subtle manipulations. The colleagues who might have offered second opinions about my treatment had been dismissed as sources of additional stress I didn't need. The financial manipulation was equally sophisticated. Marcus's offer to handle more of our money management hadn't just been about planning to inherit my assets. It had been about ensuring I was financially dependent on systems he controlled. He'd encouraged me to delegate investment decisions to him while I focused on my health recovery. He'd suggested consolidating accounts for simplicity while I was grieving and overwhelmed. Every step had been designed to make me more vulnerable and him more powerful. But as the initial shock began to give way to analytical thinking, I started to recognize something that Marcus couldn't have anticipated. My years of emergency medicine had trained me to function under extreme pressure, to make life-and-death decisions while managing intense fear and stress. The skills that made me an effective interventional cardiologist, rapid assessment, strategic thinking, decisive action under pressure, were exactly what I needed to navigate this nightmare. More importantly, I began to realize that Marcus's meticulous planning contained a fatal flaw that went beyond just the missing inheritance money. His entire strategy was built on the assumption that I would remain the passive, trusting victim he'd been conditioning me to become. He'd planned for every medical, legal, and financial contingency except one: the possibility that his victim might discover his plot and choose to fight back with the same strategic precision he'd used against her. The rage that began building in my chest felt different from the panic and shock of the initial discovery. This was cold, focused anger that brought clarity rather than confusion. Marcus had stolen more than just money or even my sense of safety. He'd stolen 18 months of my life, turning what should have been a period of healing after my father's death into an elaborate setup for my own murder. He'd weaponized my grief, exploited my medical vulnerability, and turned my trust into a tool for my destruction. But Marcus had made one critical miscalculation that was about to become his downfall. He'd spent so much time studying my medical condition, my financial assets, and my behavioral patterns that he'd failed to truly understand who I was underneath. The role of grieving, vulnerable patient he'd encouraged me to inhabit. Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood hadn't built a successful interventional cardiology practice by being passive or easily manipulated. I'd succeeded in one of the most challenging medical specialties by being strategic, thorough, and utterly ruthless when lives were at stake. And right now, my life was definitely at stake. As I lay there beside my would-be killer, my mind began shifting into the same focused, analytical mode I used when facing complex medical emergencies. I needed to assess the full scope of the threat, identify all available resources, and develop a comprehensive strategy that would not only protect me, but ensure Marcus faced consequences for his actions. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. The first priority was ensuring my immediate safety. I needed to stop taking the medications Marcus was preparing for me without alerting him to my knowledge of his plan. I had to maintain the facade of the trusting, dependent wife while secretly gathering evidence of his intentions. Most importantly, I needed to understand exactly how much time I had before he planned to implement his intervention. The second priority was documenting everything I'd discovered in a way that would be legally admissible and impossible for Marcus to destroy or discredit. His medical expertise and reputation in the community would make him a formidable adversary in any legal proceeding. I needed evidence that was so comprehensive and irrefutable that even his considerable charm and professional standing couldn't protect him. The third priority was understanding the full extent of his network and resources. Marcus hadn't developed this sophisticated plan in complete isolation. Someone had provided advice about offshore banking, legal strategies, and investigation avoidance. I needed to identify any co-conspirators and ensure they couldn't warn him or help him escape when his plan inevitably collapsed. But as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the steady breathing of the man who wanted me dead, I realized I had advantages Marcus couldn't have anticipated. The inheritance money he was planning to kill me for was already beyond his reach. The passive victim he'd been conditioning for over a year had just become someone far more dangerous than he could imagine. And the perfect murder he'd been planning was about to become the perfect trap. Dr. Marcus Blackwood thought he was hunting an unsuspecting prey. He had no idea he'd just awakened a predator who understood exactly how to turn his own weapons against him. The game was about to begin, and Marcus was about to discover that his perfect victim had become his most lethal adversary. The next morning, I performed what was probably the most challenging acting job of my medical career. When Marcus woke at his usual 5:30 a.m., I was already awake but pretended to be sleeping peacefully, the picture of a trusting wife who had no idea her husband had spent the previous evening refining plans for her murder. Every gesture had to be perfectly calibrated, showing enough of my usual morning grogginess to seem normal, but not so much that Marcus might suspect I'd been awake for hours planning my survival strategy. "Good morning, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same warm affection that had once made me feel cherished, but now made my skin crawl. He leaned over to kiss my forehead, and I had to suppress every instinct that screamed at me, to recoil from his touch. "How did you sleep? You seemed restless last night." The question sent ice through my veins. Had he heard me moving around the house? Did he suspect I'd discovered his laptop research? I forced my expression into sleepy confusion while my mind raced through possible responses that wouldn't trigger his suspicion. "I think I was still wound up from the Ramirez case," I said, stretching with what I hoped looked like natural morning stiffness. You know how my mind races after those complex procedures. I kept replaying the stent placement, wondering if I should have approached the lesion differently. Marcus's expression relaxed, and I realized I'd chosen the perfect cover story. He was accustomed to my tendency to obsess over challenging cases, and my supposed preoccupation with work would explain any unusual behavior he might have noticed. More importantly, it reinforced his image of me as someone completely absorbed in my medical practice and oblivious to his activities. As I went through my morning routine, every action required careful consideration. When Marcus prepared my medications, as he'd been doing for months, I had to accept them normally while secretly planning how to dispose of them safely. When he asked about my schedule for the day, I had to provide accurate information while beginning to mentally map out the time I'd need for evidence gathering and strategic planning. The medications presented the most immediate challenge. I couldn't simply refuse to take them without triggering Marcus's suspicion. But I also couldn't continue ingesting substances that were being calibrated for my murder. During my shower, I developed a plan that would allow me to maintain the facade while protecting myself. I would take the morning medications as usual, but find ways to induce vomiting shortly afterward, claiming stomach upset from stress. For the evening medications, I would need to develop more sophisticated methods of disposal. At breakfast, I watched Marcus with new eyes, studying his behavior for signs of nervousness or anticipation that might indicate his timeline for implementing his plan. He seemed completely normal, attentive, affectionate, genuinely interested in my work schedule and the cases I'd be handling. The casual normalcy was more terrifying than any obvious signs of malicious intent would have been. Marcus was operating with the cool professionalism of a surgeon, showing no emotional reaction to the fact that he was planning to murder me within days or weeks. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week regarding the cardiovascular center expansion," Marcus said, buttering his toast with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. "Maybe we should accelerate the timeline for that project. With your father's inheritance providing the capital, we could probably begin construction by early next year." The inheritance. He was still calculating based on money that no longer existed where he thought it was. This gave me a crucial psychological advantage. Marcus was operating with incomplete information, while I now understood both his plan and his misconceptions about our financial situation. Every reference he made to our future plans and shared assets was actually him revealing more about his motivations and timeline. "That sounds wonderful," I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice while mentally noting this as evidence of his financial motivations. "I'd love to create something lasting that honors Dad's memory while advancing cardiac care in our community." As I spoke, I was simultaneously developing a comprehensive action plan. The first phase would involve covert evidence gathering while maintaining complete normalcy in our interactions. I needed to document Marcus's research, copy his planning, documents, and gather proof of his intentions that would be admissible in legal proceedings. This would require accessing his computer when he wasn't present and finding ways to photograph or copy materials without leaving digital traces. The second phase would involve building external support systems without alerting Marcus to my activities. I needed to identify trustworthy allies who could provide assistance while maintaining absolute secrecy about my situation. This meant carefully selecting colleagues and friends who had both the expertise to help and the discretion to keep my situation confidential until I was ready to act. The third phase would involve consulting with legal and security professionals to ensure my safety while building a case against Marcus. I needed expert advice on evidence collection, witness protection, and legal strategies that would ensure Marcus faced appropriate consequences for his actions. This couldn't be handled through normal channels since Marcus's reputation and connections in the medical community might compromise standard investigative procedures. After Marcus left for the hospital, I immediately implemented the first steps of my plan. I used my laptop to research digital forensics techniques that would allow me to access Marcus's computer and copy his files without leaving traces. I learned about specialized software that could create exact duplicates of hard drives and about methods for photographing documents that would preserve legal admissibility. Next, I began researching private investigators and security consultants in nearby cities who specialized in domestic threats and had no connections to Millbrook Heights medical community. I needed professionals who could operate independently of local law enforcement and who had experience with sophisticated criminals like Marcus. The investigators would need expertise in financial crimes, digital evidence collection, and personal protection services. The financial aspect required immediate attention. I needed to ensure that all my assets were completely secured and that Marcus couldn't access any accounts or investments if he became suspicious of my activities. This meant reviewing every shared financial arrangement and identifying any vulnerabilities that could compromise my independence or safety. I also began researching Marcus's background more thoroughly than I'd ever done during our relationship. If he was capable of planning elaborate murder schemes, there might be other aspects of his history that I'd never discovered. I needed to understand whether this was his first criminal enterprise or whether there might be other victims or crimes in his past. The most critical research involved understanding the legal requirements for evidence collection in cases involving spousal abuse and domestic violence. I needed to ensure that everything I gathered would be admissible in court and that my actions wouldn't compromise any eventual prosecution. This meant learning about chain of custody procedures, documentation requirements, and witness protection protocols. As I worked through these preparations, I found myself drawing on skills and knowledge I'd never expected to use outside of medical practice. The analytical thinking that made me effective in cardiac interventions was perfectly suited to developing comprehensive strategies for surviving and defeating Marcus's plot. The attention to detail that allowed me to perform complex procedures with millimeter precision was exactly what I needed for gathering evidence and planning countermeasures. By mid-afternoon, I had developed a detailed timeline for gathering evidence and building my case against Marcus. The plan would require approximately 2 weeks to implement fully, during which I would need to maintain perfect normalcy while secretly documenting his activities and securing my safety. The timeline was aggressive, but necessary. I couldn't be certain how much longer Marcus planned to wait before implementing his intervention. The psychological challenge of maintaining the facade of our marriage while knowing the truth about Marcus's intentions was exhausting, but I found strength in recognizing that every day I successfully deceived him was another day closer to ensuring he faced justice for his crimes. Marcus thought he was the predator in our relationship, but he was about to discover that his prey had become the hunter. Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood was done being a victim. It was time to show Marcus Blackwood what happened when someone with my skills and resources decided to fight back. 3 days into my covert investigation, I discovered that Marcus's murder plot was far more extensive and dangerous than I'd initially realized. What I'd thought was a single man's calculated plan to kill his wife for inheritance money was actually part of a sophisticated network involving multiple conspirators and potentially other victims. The scope of what I uncovered made me realize that I wasn't just fighting for my own life. I was potentially the key to exposing a conspiracy that had already claimed lives and would continue to do so if not stopped. The revelation came when I managed to access Marcus's personal email account, using a password recovery technique I'd learned from my digital forensics research. I'd discovered that Marcus used variations of surgical terminology for his passwords, and after several attempts, I successfully accessed his private communications using a combination of aortic valve and his medical license number. What I found in his deleted emails folder made my blood run cold. Marcus had been corresponding with someone named Dr. Victoria Ashland for over 8 months. The name was familiar from medical conferences, but I'd never met her personally. According to their email exchanges, Dr. Ashland was a forensic pathologist based in Hartford who specialized in determining causes of death in complex medical cases. Their correspondence wasn't about professional consultations. It was about perfecting methods for committing undetectable murders of medical professionals. The emails revealed that Marcus wasn't the only physician planning to murder his spouse for financial gain. Dr. Ashland had apparently been coordinating a network of medical professionals who were systematically eliminating their partners, using their medical expertise to make the deaths appear natural. The scheme was diabolical in its sophistication, using their medical knowledge and professional reputations to commit perfect crimes while supporting each other's alibis and providing expert testimony if any deaths were questioned. Dr. Ashland's role was particularly crucial to the conspiracy. As a forensic pathologist, she could influence autopsy findings and death investigations. Her emails with Marcus discussed techniques for manipulating post-mortem examinations to support accidental death conclusions. She provided detailed advice about which toxicology tests were routinely performed versus which required specific requests, and how to ensure that suspicious substances would be overlooked during standard autopsy procedures. But the most horrifying discovery was evidence that this network had already been successful. The emails referenced 3 previous cases where spouses of medical professionals had died under circumstances that were ruled accidental, but appeared to follow the same methodical planning Marcus was using for my murder. Dr. Robert Chen, no relation, in New Haven had lost his wife to an apparent medication overdose 6 months ago. Dr. Patricia Williams in Stamford had become a widower when his wife died from complications following routine surgery. Dr. Michael Rodriguez in Bridgeport had inherited substantial assets when his spouse died from what appeared to be a stress-induced heart attack. Each case had been investigated by local authorities and ruled accidental or natural, with Dr. Ashland providing expert testimony supporting the official conclusions. The pattern was clear once I understood what to look for. Medical professionals with substantial financial motivations systematically murdering their spouses and using their medical expertise and professional networks to avoid detection. The emails revealed that the network had been operating for over 2 years and had successfully eliminated at least 7 people without arousing any suspicion from law enforcement. They had refined their methods through each murder, learning from any investigative challenges and developing more sophisticated techniques for the next case. Marcus's plan for my death represented the culmination of years of collaborative refinement in medical murder techniques. More disturbing was the discovery that I wasn't Marcus's only intended victim. The emails discussed a timeline that involved multiple murders over the coming months, with several network members planning to eliminate their spouses during the upcoming holiday season when increased stress and family gatherings would provide cover for apparent accidents or medical emergencies. Marcus was scheduled to implement his plan for my death within the next 2 weeks, but he was just one of 6 network members preparing simultaneous operations. The financial aspect of the conspiracy was staggering. The combined inheritance and insurance proceeds from the planned murders totaled over $40 million. The network had arranged for offshore accounts and international investment strategies that would allow them to benefit from their crimes while avoiding taxation and potential scrutiny from financial institutions. They'd essentially created a murder-for-profit operation disguised as tragic coincidences within the medical community. Dr. Ashland's emails also revealed that the network had contingency plans for dealing with potential witnesses or investigators who might become suspicious. They'd identified private investigators, insurance investigators, and law enforcement personnel who might pose threats to their operations. The contingency plans included methods for discrediting potential witnesses and, if necessary, eliminating anyone who came too close to exposing their activities. This discovery changed everything about my situation. I wasn't just dealing with one murderous husband. I was potentially the only person who could expose a conspiracy that was actively murdering people and planning to continue. The responsibility was overwhelming, but it also provided motivation beyond just my own survival. If I could gather enough evidence to expose this network, I could prevent multiple murders and ensure justice for victims whose deaths had been disguised as accidents. The network's sophistication also explained some aspects of Marcus's behavior. That had puzzled me. His confidence in avoiding detection wasn't just based on his own medical expertise. It was supported by a proven system that had already successfully eliminated multiple victims. His detailed planning wasn't just methodical personality, but the result of collaborative refinement with other medical professionals who shared techniques and lessons learned from previous murders. But the network's very sophistication also created vulnerabilities that I could exploit. Their extensive communication trail provided evidence of conspiracy that would be devastating in legal proceedings. Their coordination meant that exposing one member could potentially bring down the entire operation. Most importantly, their arrogance and sense of security had led them to document their activities in ways that would be legally admissible if properly gathered and presented. The timeline pressure intensified dramatically with this discovery. Marcus's plan for my murder was part of a coordinated operation involving multiple simultaneous killings. If I focused only on stopping him, other innocent people would die while the network continued operating. I needed to gather evidence against the entire conspiracy while ensuring my own safety and preventing the upcoming murders. The complexity of what I was facing required resources and expertise far beyond what I'd initially planned. I needed to contact federal law enforcement agencies that could handle interstate conspiracy cases. I needed digital forensics experts who could properly document the electronic evidence. I needed witness protection services that could keep me safe while I testified against medical professionals with substantial resources and connections. Most critically, I needed to accelerate my timeline without alerting Marcus or any network members to my activities. The discovery of the conspiracy meant that any unusual behavior on my part could trigger not just Marcus's suspicion, but coordinated response from multiple conspirators who had experience eliminating threats to their operation. As I sat in my home office, surrounded by printed emails and evidence of a murder conspiracy that extended far beyond my own situation, I realized that the stakes had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. I was no longer just fighting for my own life. I was potentially the only person who could stop a network of medical professionals who were systematically murdering their spouses and using their professional expertise to avoid justice. The woman who had discovered her husband's murder plot had become something far more significant. The key witness who could expose a conspiracy that threatened innocent lives across multiple states. Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood was about to take on a network of medical professionals who thought their expertise made them untouchable. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The discovery of the murder network meant I needed allies with capabilities far beyond what I'd initially planned. I couldn't handle this alone, but I also couldn't trust local law enforcement given the network's apparent ability to manipulate investigations. I needed federal resources, digital forensics experts, and people who understood how to dismantle sophisticated criminal conspiracies involving medical professionals. Most importantly, I needed allies who could act quickly and secretly without alerting Marcus or any network members to my activities. My first call was to Dr. Jennifer Walsh, my medical school roommate who had become a federal prosecutor specializing in healthcare fraud. Jennifer worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, handling cases involving medical professionals who abused their positions for criminal gain. I'd stayed in loose contact with her over the years, and I knew she had both the expertise and the resources to understand what I'd discovered. "Sophia, it's wonderful to hear from you," Jennifer said when she answered my call from a secure phone I'd purchased with cash. "How are you handling everything with your father's passing?" The irony of her question wasn't lost on me. If Marcus's plan succeeded, Jennifer would probably be hearing about my own death within weeks. But her mention of my father's death gave me the perfect opening to explain my financial situation without revealing the full scope of what I'd discovered. "Actually, that's part of why I'm calling," I said, choosing my words carefully, since I wasn't certain whether my regular phone lines were secure. "I've discovered some concerning irregularities in how certain medical professionals are handling inheritance and insurance matters. I think it might be something your office would be interested in investigating." Jennifer's tone immediately became more focused. After 15 years of prosecuting medical fraud, she'd developed an instinct for recognizing potentially significant cases. "What kind of irregularities are we talking about?" "The kind that involve systematic patterns across multiple jurisdictions and potentially multiple victims," I replied. "I think we need to meet in person to discuss this properly. It's too sensitive for phone conversations." We arranged to meet that evening at a restaurant in Hartford, roughly halfway between our locations and far enough from Millbrook Heights to avoid any chance encounters with Marcus or his colleagues. I told Marcus I was attending a cardiology conference dinner, a lie that fit perfectly with my professional obligations and would explain my absence for several hours. Simultaneously, I was researching and contacting other essential allies. Through medical conference connections, I identified Dr. Sarah Kim, a forensic psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins, who specialized in analyzing criminal behavior patterns among medical professionals. Dr. Kim had published extensively on physician criminals and would understand both the psychological profiles and the investigative challenges involved in cases like this. I also reached out to Detective Captain Michael Torres of the Connecticut State Police, whose specialized unit handled complex fraud cases involving professional criminals. Captain Torres had a reputation for being incorruptible and for having the resources to conduct sophisticated investigations without relying on local authorities who might be compromised. The digital forensics aspect required particular expertise. Through professional networks, I contacted Rebecca Chen, again, no relation, a cybersecurity consultant who specialized in gathering legally admissible digital evidence in criminal cases. Rebecca had worked with federal agencies on cases involving criminal conspiracies that relied heavily on electronic communications. My meeting with Jennifer that evening was more productive than I'd hoped. When I showed her printed copies of the emails between Marcus and Dr. Ashland, along with my analysis of the financial patterns and victim timeline, her expression became increasingly grim. "Sophia, this is potentially one of the most sophisticated murder conspiracies I've ever seen," Jennifer said, reviewing the documents with the focused intensity I remembered from medical school. "The level of coordination and the use of medical expertise to avoid detection makes this a federal matter involving multiple jurisdictions." She immediately began making calls to colleagues who specialized in organized crime and conspiracy cases. Within 2 hours, she'd arranged for me to meet with Special Agent David Rodriguez of the FBI's White-Collar Crime Unit, whose team had experience with criminal conspiracies involving medical professionals. "The challenge," Jennifer explained, "is that we need to gather evidence against the entire network without alerting any members to our investigation. If they realize they're under scrutiny, they could accelerate their timeline, eliminate evidence, or potentially target you as a threat to their operation. This concern was already weighing heavily on my mind. The network's contingency plans for dealing with potential witnesses meant that my safety depended on maintaining absolute secrecy while building a case against them. Any mistake could trigger a coordinated response from multiple medical professionals who had already proven their willingness to kill to protect their interests. Rebecca Chen's digital forensics assessment was both encouraging and terrifying. She confirmed that the email evidence I'd gathered was legally admissible and provided a solid foundation for proving conspiracy charges. However, she also identified additional digital evidence that needed to be collected quickly before the network members realized their communications might be compromised. They're using encrypted communication channels for some of their coordination, Rebecca explained during our secure video conference. I can help you access those communications, but we need to do it in a way that doesn't trigger their security protocols. If they realize their systems have been breached, they'll immediately switch to different communication methods and potentially eliminate digital evidence. Dr. Sarah Kim's psychological analysis provided crucial insights into how to proceed strategically. She explained that medical professionals who commit crimes often have highly developed risk assessment capabilities, but they also tend to be overconfident about their ability to manipulate systems and avoid detection. The network's greatest strength is also their greatest vulnerability, Dr. Kim noted. Their medical expertise makes them confident they can commit perfect crimes, but it also makes them document their activities more thoroughly than typical criminals. They think in terms of medical protocols and evidence-based procedures, which means they create detailed records that can be used against them. Captain Torres coordinated with federal agencies to ensure that my safety could be protected while evidence was gathered against the network. His assessment was that the conspiracy posed an ongoing threat to multiple potential victims and required immediate intervention. We're looking at a ticking clock situation, Captain Torres explained. Based on the timeline you've discovered, several murders are planned for the next few weeks. We need to gather enough evidence to arrest the entire network before they can implement their plans or realize they're under investigation. The federal coordination meeting included representatives from multiple agencies. Special Agent Rodriguez brought expertise in conspiracy cases, while Agent Lisa Park from the FBI's Cybercrime Division handled the digital evidence aspects. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Foster would coordinate the legal strategy for prosecuting federal charges against network members. This case has the potential to save multiple lives while exposing a criminal conspiracy that's already succeeded in committing several murders, Agent Rodriguez explained. Dr. Chen Blackwood, your evidence and cooperation could be the key to dismantling an operation that would otherwise continue killing innocent people. The resources being assembled were impressive, but also highlighted how dangerous my situation had become. Witness protection services were arranged through the U.S. Marshals Service. Safe houses were identified in case I needed to disappear quickly. Communication protocols were established for maintaining contact with federal agents without alerting Marcus to my activities. Dr. Jennifer Walsh coordinated the legal strategy to ensure that evidence collection would support prosecution of all network members under federal conspiracy and murder charges. The complexity of prosecuting medical professionals required specialized approaches that could overcome their professional credibility and access to expert witnesses. Rebecca Chen developed a comprehensive digital surveillance plan that would allow federal agents to monitor the network's communications in real time while gathering additional evidence of their criminal activities. The plan included methods for accessing encrypted communications and documenting financial transactions related to the conspiracy. Most importantly, the federal team developed operational security protocols that would protect my safety while I continued gathering evidence from inside the conspiracy. I would maintain my normal routine with Marcus while secretly documenting his activities and providing real-time intelligence to federal agents. As I left that evening's coordination meeting, I realized that what had started as my personal fight for Survival had become a federal investigation with the potential to save multiple lives and expose a criminal network that had operated with impunity for over 2 years. I was no longer just Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood trying to survive her husband's murder plot. I was now a federal witness whose testimony could bring down a conspiracy of medical professionals who thought their expertise made them untouchable. The hunters were about to become the hunted, and they had no idea that their perfect victim had become the key to their complete destruction. The federal operation reached its climax on a cold Thursday morning in November, exactly 13 days after I'd first discovered Marcus's murder. What? The FBI had been monitoring the network's communications for a week, gathering evidence of the coordinated murders planned for the holiday season. But Marcus had moved up his timeline unexpectedly, and I found myself facing the most dangerous performance of my life, allowing him to believe he was implementing his plan while federal agents prepared to close the trap around the entire network. It started when Marcus announced over breakfast that he'd taken Friday off from his surgical schedule, claiming he wanted to spend a long weekend focusing on my health and recovery. His tone was caring and attentive, but I recognized the announcement for what it really was: notification that he planned to kill me within the next 72 hours. The federal surveillance team had predicted this possibility based on intercepted communications, indicating that network members were feeling pressure to accelerate their operations. "I think you've been pushing yourself too hard lately," Marcus said, preparing my morning medications with the same methodical care he'd shown for months. "Your cardiac symptoms seem more pronounced, and I'm worried about the stress you're putting on your system. Maybe it's time we adjusted your medication regimen to provide better symptom control." Every word was carefully chosen to establish the narrative he would use after my death. Marcus was creating a medical history that would support his claim that my heart condition had worsened despite his careful management of my treatment. The adjusted medication regimen was undoubtedly the lethal combination he'd been perfecting for months. "That sounds wise," I replied, accepting the pills he handed me while knowing that FBI surveillance equipment was recording every word of our conversation. Special Agent Rodriguez and his team were positioned in a surveillance van 2 blocks away, monitoring the situation through audio and video feeds from devices Rebecca Chen had installed throughout our house during one of Marcus's surgical days. The most challenging aspect was maintaining my performance while knowing that federal agents were listening to every interaction. I had to continue playing the role of the trusting, vulnerable wife, while providing subtle verbal cues that would help the surveillance team understand Marcus's actions and timeline. The protocols we'd established required me to use specific phrases that would indicate whether I felt safe or needed immediate intervention. As Marcus prepared for work, he mentioned that Dr. Ashland would be visiting Millbrook Heights that evening to discuss a forensic consultation case with him. This information sent immediate alerts through the federal surveillance network. Dr. Ashland's presence would mean that 2 key network members would be in the same location when Marcus implemented his murder plan, providing an opportunity to arrest multiple conspirators simultaneously. "It'll be nice to finally meet her properly," I said, knowing that this comment would alert the surveillance team to prepare for the accelerated timeline. "You've mentioned her forensic expertise so often, and I'm curious about her perspective on complex medical cases." Marcus's expression showed brief surprise at my interest, but he quickly masked it with apparent pleasure at my engagement with his professional connections. He had no idea that Dr. Ashland's visit was walking directly into a federal trap that had been meticulously planned to capture the entire network. Throughout the day, I maintained my normal routine while federal agents positioned themselves for the evening operation. I saw patients at the hospital, performed a routine cardiac catheterization procedure, and attended administrative meetings, all while knowing that my husband was finalizing plans to murder me that evening. The psychological strain was enormous, but it was also empowering to know that Marcus's careful planning was about to be turned against him and his co-conspirators. Dr. Jennifer Walsh called in the afternoon to provide a legal update, speaking, in carefully coded language that wouldn't alert Marcus if he was monitoring my phone communications. "The consultation we discussed has been approved by all relevant departments," she said, meaning that federal prosecutors were ready to file charges against all network members as soon as arrests were made. "All the specialists will be available for the evening session." The federal team had identified 6 network members who would be arrested simultaneously across 3 states, preventing any possibility of warning each other or destroying evidence. The coordination required split-second timing to ensure that none of the conspirators could escape or alert others to the federal investigation. As I prepared to leave the hospital that evening, I received the agreed-upon signal from Agent Rodriguez, a text message containing only the words, "Dinner confirmed for 8." This meant that federal agents were in position and that Dr. Ashland had arrived in Millbrook Heights as expected. The trap was set, and I was about to return home for what Marcus believed would be my final evening alive. The drive home felt surreal. I was returning to a house where my husband was waiting to murder me, but I was also returning to what would become the scene of his arrest and the dismantling of a criminal conspiracy that had already claimed multiple lives. The woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal 2 weeks ago was about to witness the complete destruction of everything he'd built through lies and murder. When I arrived home, Marcus greeted me with unusual affection, holding me longer than normal and expressing his love with words that carried sinister undertones now that I understood his true intentions. "You mean everything to me, Sophia," he said, his voice filled with apparent emotion. "I can't imagine my life without you." Dr. Victoria Ashland arrived at 7:30 p.m., and I finally met the woman who had been coordinating multiple murders across Connecticut. She was smaller than I'd expected, professionally dressed, with the kind of confident demeanor I associated with successful medical professionals. She greeted me warmly, expressing concern about my health and praising Marcus's dedication to my care. "Marcus has told me so much about your cardiac condition," Dr. Ashland said as we settled in the living room with wine that Marcus had selected carefully. "It's fortunate that you have such an attentive physician managing your treatment. Medication management in cardiac cases can be so complex and critical." Every word carried double meaning. Dr. Ashland was simultaneously maintaining her cover as a concerned medical colleague while acknowledging her role in helping Marcus plan the perfect medical murder. She had no idea that federal agents were listening to every word and that her comments were being recorded as evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus excused himself to prepare dinner, leaving Dr. Ashland and me alone in what he believed was a perfect setup for discussing my medical condition in detail before implementing his plan. This was my opportunity to gather final evidence while federal agents prepared for the coordinated arrests. "I understand you specialize in forensic pathology," I said, maintaining my role as the innocent wife while leading Dr. Ashland toward potentially incriminating statements. "It must be fascinating work, determining causes of death in complex medical cases." "It is," Dr. Ashland replied, her confidence evident as she warmed to the topic. "Medical professionals sometimes face unique challenges when we lose patients or colleagues unexpectedly. My expertise helps families and institutions understand what happened and find closure." She was talking about providing false testimony to cover up murders, but she phrased it in language that would sound innocent to anyone who didn't understand the context. The recording would provide federal prosecutors with evidence of her role in the conspiracy while demonstrating her consciousness of guilt. At exactly 8:47 p.m., as Marcus was preparing what he intended to be my final meal, federal agents surrounded our house. The coordinated operation involved simultaneous arrests across 3 states, with network members being taken into custody at precisely the same moment to prevent any possibility of escape or evidence destruction. "FBI search warrant!" The announcement came from multiple entry points simultaneously as federal agents stormed into our home. Marcus dropped the wine glass he'd been holding, his face showing the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in months. Complete shock and terror as his perfect plan collapsed around him. Dr. Ashland attempted to maintain her innocent facade for approximately 30 seconds before the reality of her situation became clear. When Agent Rodriguez read her rights while displaying printed copies of her emails with Marcus, her professional composure cracked completely. Marcus Blackwood and Victoria Ashland, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, multiple counts of homicide, and federal racketeering charges, Agent Rodriguez announced as other agents secured the scene and began collecting evidence. As I watched federal agents handcuff the man who had shared my bed while planning my murder, I felt a combination of relief, vindication, and sadness for the innocent woman I'd been just 2 weeks earlier. The woman who had trusted completely and loved unconditionally was gone forever, replaced by someone harder and more cautious, but also more aware of her own strength and capability. Marcus looked at me with an expression of complete bewilderment as the handcuffs clicked into place. In that moment, I realized he had never truly understood who I was. He'd seen only the role I'd played as his devoted wife, never recognizing the intelligence, strength, and determination that had made me a successful cardiac surgeon. His fatal mistake hadn't been underestimating my medical knowledge or my financial resources. It had been underestimating my fundamental character. "Did you really think I was that naive?" I asked him as federal agents prepared to escort him from our home. "Did you honestly believe that someone capable of performing complex cardiac surgery couldn't recognize when she was being manipulated and threatened?" The look in Marcus's eyes as he was led away told me everything I needed to know. Even now, facing federal murder charges and the complete destruction of his carefully planned scheme, he still couldn't comprehend how his perfect victim had become his perfect downfall. Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood had not only survived her husband's murder plot, she had orchestrated the complete destruction of a criminal network that would never threaten another innocent life. The immediate aftermath of the arrests was a whirlwind of federal activity that made our Millbrook Heights home feel like the center of a major criminal investigation. Within 2 hours of Marcus and Dr. Ashland's arrest, our house was filled with forensic specialists, digital evidence technicians, and federal agents methodically documenting every aspect of the conspiracy. I found myself simultaneously a key witness, a crime victim, and an observer to the systematic dismantling of what had been my life for 12 years. Special Agent Rodriguez coordinated the evidence collection with the precision of a surgeon, ensuring that every document, computer file, and piece of physical evidence was properly cataloged for the federal prosecution. The scope of materials being seized was staggering. Marcus's computers, our financial records, medication bottles, medical journals, and even personal items that might have been used to establish his apparent grief narrative after my planned death. "Dr. Chen Blackwood, we've located Marcus's backup documentation," Agent Rodriguez informed me as his team worked through Marcus's study. He maintained detailed records of his research and planning that go back 18 months. The level of documentation is unprecedented in cases like this. It's as if he couldn't resist treating this conspiracy like a medical research project. The backup documentation revealed the true extent of Marcus's obsession with creating the perfect murder. He'd maintained spreadsheets tracking my daily stress levels, medication responses, work schedules, and social interactions. He'd photographed my medical charts during routine appointments and had kept detailed notes about conversations with my cardiologist that I'd never known he'd had. The systematic nature of his surveillance was more thorough than anything I'd imagined during our marriage. Rebecca Chen's digital forensics team had struck gold with the network's electronic communications. The encrypted channels that Marcus and Dr. Ashland thought were secure had been completely compromised, revealing conversations with other network members that detailed planning for multiple murders scheduled for the upcoming weeks. The digital evidence would provide federal prosecutors with ironclad proof of conspiracy charges against all 6 network members. The communications show that they were planning to eliminate 11 people over the next 2 months, Rebecca explained as she reviewed the decrypted files. Your discovery and the federal intervention has literally saved the lives of 10 other innocent people who had no idea they were being targeted for murder. The financial investigation uncovered a sophisticated money laundering operation that went far beyond simple inheritance fraud. The network had established offshore accounts, shell companies, and international investment structures designed to hide the proceeds from their murders, while providing legitimate-appearing income streams for the conspirators. The financial crimes alone would result in federal charges carrying decades of prison time. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Foster arrived that evening to coordinate the prosecution strategy and ensure that all evidence was properly preserved for federal court proceedings. Her assessment of the case was that it represented one of the most comprehensive criminal conspiracies she'd encountered involving medical professionals. "The evidence we've gathered in the past 2 weeks is overwhelming," Foster explained during our debriefing session. "We have electronic communications detailing the conspiracy, financial records showing the money laundering operation, and physical evidence of the murder methods. But your testimony will be crucial for establishing the human element that a jury needs to understand the full scope of these crimes." The other network members had been arrested simultaneously across Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts. Dr. Robert Stevens in Hartford had been taken into custody while preparing what would have been his wife's final medication dose. Dr. Patricia Martinez in Springfield had been arrested during a meeting with a life insurance representative about policies on her husband. Dr. James Wilson in New Haven had been caught while researching cremation services that would destroy forensic evidence after his wife's planned death. Each arrest had yielded additional evidence that strengthened the federal case against the entire network. The conspirators had been so confident in their methods that they'd maintained extensive documentation of their planning, apparently believing that their medical expertise and professional reputations would protect them from any serious investigation. The media response was immediate and intense. By the next morning, news outlets across the region were reporting on the medical murder network that had been dismantled by federal agents. The story dominated local news cycles and quickly gained national attention as details emerged about the sophistication of the conspiracy and the number of lives that had been saved by the federal intervention. Marcus's colleagues at Riverside Memorial Hospital were interviewed by news reporters, expressing shock and disbelief at the charges against someone they'd considered a respected physician and community leader. The hospital immediately suspended Marcus's privileges and launched an internal investigation into whether any patient care had been compromised by his criminal activities. My own hospital, Millbrook General, handled the situation more supportively. Hospital administration recognized that I was a victim rather than a conspirator and provided resources for counseling and legal support. My colleagues in the cardiology department rallied around me, offering both professional and personal support, during what they understood was an incredibly traumatic period. The legal proceedings moved with unusual speed for federal criminal cases. The evidence was so comprehensive and the crimes so serious that defense attorneys for the network members had limited options for challenging the charges. Dr. Ashland attempted to claim that her communications with Marcus were theoretical discussions rather than actual murder planning, but the detailed nature of her instructions for avoiding forensic detection made this defense untenable. Marcus's legal strategy focused on portraying him as someone who had suffered a psychological breakdown due to financial stress and my health problems. His attorneys suggested that the murder plot was the result of temporary insanity rather than calculated criminal intent. This defense collapsed when prosecutors presented evidence of his 18 months of methodical planning and research. Within 6 weeks of the arrests, 4 of the 6 network members had accepted plea bargains in exchange for cooperation and testimony against the remaining conspirators. Dr. Stevens, Dr. Martinez, Dr. Wilson, and Dr. Sarah Palmer, who had been arrested in Boston, all agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy charges and provide detailed testimony about the network's operations. Marcus and Dr. Ashland refused to accept plea deals, apparently believing that their professional credentials and Legal resources would allow them to fight the charges successfully. This decision proved catastrophic when the cooperating network members provided testimony that eliminated any remaining doubt about their leadership roles in the conspiracy. The financial restitution ordered by federal courts was substantial. All assets acquired by network members through their criminal activities were seized and liquidated to compensate victims' families and cover the costs of the federal investigation. The seized assets totaled over $60 million, including offshore accounts, real estate investments, and luxury items purchased with proceeds from the murders. For me personally, the immediate consequences included both liberation and profound loss. The financial security I'd worked so hard to build was intact. The inheritance money Marcus had planned to steal remained safely in my private accounts, and my medical practice continued to generate substantial income. But the emotional cost of discovering that my 12-year marriage had been an elaborate deception designed to culminate in my murder was devastating. The house at 847 Elmhurst Drive, which had represented everything Marcus and I had worked for, together became a crime scene that I could no longer inhabit. Federal agents recommended that I relocate immediately for both security and psychological reasons. The memories of our life together had been poisoned by the knowledge of what Marcus had really been planning in the rooms where I'd thought we were building a future together. Within a month, I'd sold the house and moved to a secure condominium in downtown Hartford, closer to both Jennifer Walsh's office and the federal courthouse where I would eventually testify against Marcus and Dr. Ashland. The sale proceeds, along with the inheritance money that had inadvertently saved my life, provided more than enough financial security to rebuild my life on my own terms. The immediate professional consequences were mixed, but ultimately positive. My role in exposing the medical murder network enhanced my reputation within the broader medical community, where I became known as someone who had courageously fought against corruption within our profession. Speaking engagements and consulting, opportunities arose from medical institutions seeking expertise on identifying and preventing criminal behavior among healthcare professionals. But perhaps the most significant immediate consequence was the transformation in my own identity and capabilities. The woman who had trusted completely and loved unconditionally was gone, replaced by someone who understood that survival sometimes required strategic thinking, careful planning, and the willingness to fight back against those who would exploit. Trust for criminal gain. Dr. Sophia Chen Blackwood had not only survived her husband's murder plot, she had become the catalyst for dismantling a criminal network and preventing multiple murders, while establishing herself as someone who would never again be anyone's victim. 2 years have passed since that November evening when federal agents arrested Marcus in our kitchen, and the woman who emerged from that experience bears little resemblance to the trusting wife, who once believed that love and medical expertise were sufficient protection against the world's dangers. Dr. Sophia Chen now lives in a stunning penthouse, overlooking Hartford's Constitution Plaza, where floor-to-ceiling windows provide panoramic views of a city that represents new beginnings rather than betrayed dreams. The trial proceedings concluded 8 months ago with outcomes that exceeded even the federal prosecutor's expectations. Marcus received life imprisonment without possibility of parole after being convicted on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, racketeering, and financial crimes. Dr. Victoria Ashland received a similar sentence, her forensic pathology expertise having been used to facilitate multiple murders rather than seek justice for victims. The cooperating network members received sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years, ensuring that none of them would ever again be in positions to exploit medical knowledge for criminal gain. During the sentencing hearing, I delivered a victim impact statement that received national media attention and later became part of training materials for law enforcement agencies investigating crimes involving medical professionals. Standing before the federal judge while Marcus sat in shackles just 20 feet away, I spoke not just as his intended victim, but as a representative of all the innocent people whose lives had been saved by exposing the network. Your Honor, The man sitting at the defense table didn't just plan to murder me for money, I said, looking directly at Marcus for the first time since his arrest. He turned 12 years of marriage into an elaborate crime, weaponizing love, trust, and medical care itself. But his greatest miscalculation wasn't underestimating my intelligence or my resources. It was failing to understand that some people become more dangerous when they're pushed beyond their breaking point. Marcus never looked at me during my statement. Even facing life imprisonment, he couldn't acknowledge the reality of what he'd done or accept responsibility for the lives he'd destroyed and the lives he'd planned to take. His final words to the court were a rambling statement about financial pressures and medical stress, as if external circumstances could justify systematic murder planning. The financial recovery exceeded expectations as well. Federal asset forfeiture. Procedures recovered over $80 million from the network's criminal activities, including proceeds from murders they'd already committed and assets acquired through fraud and money laundering. As the primary witness whose testimony had made the prosecutions possible, I received a substantial victim compensation settlement that, combined with my father's inheritance and my continued medical practice, established financial security beyond anything I'd ever imagined. More importantly, the experience led to my transition into a new professional focus that utilizes my medical expertise while addressing the broader implications of what I'd discovered. I now serve as Director of Medical Ethics and Criminal Behavior Prevention at Hartford Hospital, a position created specifically to develop protocols for identifying and preventing criminal behavior among healthcare professionals. The role combines clinical work with consultation services for hospitals, law enforcement agencies, and legal organizations dealing with cases involving medical professionals who abuse their positions. The work is deeply satisfying in ways that my previous clinical practice, despite its technical challenges, never provided. Every system I develop for identifying potentially dangerous healthcare workers, every training program I design for recognizing signs of professional misconduct, and every consultation I provide to investigate suspicious medical deaths represents progress toward preventing other innocent people from experiencing what I survived. My research has been published in major medical journals and law enforcement publications, establishing new standards for background investigations of medical professionals and creating protocols for recognizing patterns that might indicate criminal behavior. The Chen Protocol, as it's become known in professional circles, has been adopted by medical institutions across 12 states and has already identified several healthcare workers who were engaged in suspicious activities. The personal transformation has been equally profound. The woman who once trusted implicitly now verifies extensively. The person who once believed that professional credentials guaranteed moral character now understands that expertise can be weaponized by those with criminal intent. But rather than becoming cynical or paranoid, I've developed what I call strategic vigilance, the ability to remain open to genuine relationships while maintaining awareness of potential threats. My new home reflects this transformation. The penthouse includes a sophisticated security system, multiple communication methods, and carefully planned escape routes, but it's also filled with art, music, and beautiful furnishings that represent joy and hope rather than fear. I've learned that protecting yourself doesn't require living in constant anxiety. It requires being prepared while still embracing life's possibilities. The dating world at 40, after surviving your husband's murder plot, presents unique challenges. How do you explain to potential partners that your last relationship ended when federal agents arrested your spouse for planning your death? How do you build trust when your most intimate relationship was revealed to be an elaborate deception, designed to culminate in murder? The answer, I've discovered, is slowly and with complete honesty. 6 months ago, I began dating Dr. Michael Rivera, a psychiatrist who specializes in treating trauma survivors and who understands both the professional and personal implications of what I experienced. Our relationship developed through professional collaboration on research projects before evolving into something personal, built on shared intellectual interests and genuine compatibility, rather than the intense romantic chemistry that had blinded me to Marcus's true nature. Michael knows my complete history, has read the court transcripts, and understands why I need certain security protocols and communication practices in our relationship. Rather than being intimidated by my experience or my resources, he respects the strength it took to survive and the wisdom I gained from the ordeal. He's also secure enough in his own professional accomplishments to appreciate my success without feeling threatened by my financial independence or public recognition. Friendship networks I've built are equally intentional and carefully chosen. My closest friends now include Jennifer Walsh, whose federal prosecution expertise helped save my life, Rebecca Chen, whose digital forensics skills exposed the conspiracy, and Dr. Sarah Kim, whose psychological insights helped me understand both the criminal behavior I encountered and my own recovery process. These relationships are built on shared professional respect and personal experiences that created bonds deeper than typical social connections. The speaking engagements and consulting work have introduced me to law enforcement professionals, legal experts, and other survivors who understand the complexities of fighting back against sophisticated criminals. These connections provide both professional opportunities and personal support from people who've faced similar challenges and made similar choices about refusing to remain victims. Perhaps most importantly, I've developed a new relationship with my own capabilities and limitations. The experience taught me that I'm stronger, smarter, and more resourceful than I'd ever realized, but it also showed me the importance of recognizing when I need help and accepting support from others. The woman who survived Marcus's murder plot did so not through solitary heroics, but through strategic alliances with people who had complementary skills and resources. The broader impact of exposing the medical murder network continues to expand. Federal agencies now include medical professional criminal behavior in their training programs for investigating suspicious deaths. Medical schools have incorporated case studies based on Marcus's conspiracy into their ethics curricula. Professional. Medical organizations have strengthened their background investigation requirements and peer monitoring systems. Most satisfying is the knowledge that the investigation led to reopening several previously closed cases involving suspicious deaths of spouses of medical professionals. 3 additional murders have been reclassified as homicides based on patterns identified through the network investigation, providing closure for families who had suspected but couldn't prove that their loved ones had been murdered. As I sit in my Hartford penthouse this evening, reviewing research data for a new publication about recognizing financial motivations in medical crimes, I sometimes think about the alternative timeline where I never discovered Marcus's laptop research. In that reality, I would have died from what appeared to be a medication error. Marcus would have inherited money that no longer existed where he expected it, and a criminal network would have continued murdering innocent people across multiple states. Instead, I'm alive, financially secure, professionally fulfilled, and personally transformed into someone who understands both the depths of human evil and the power of strategic resistance. The woman who once believed that love and trust were sufficient protection against betrayal has become someone who knows that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to be anyone's victim. Dr. Sophia Chen survived her husband's murder plot and became something her would-be killer never anticipated, living proof that underestimating your victim is the most fatal mistake a predator can make. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just surviving, it's thriving in ways your enemies never thought possible while ensuring they can never threaten anyone else again. The hunter became the hunted, and justice was served with the precision of a perfectly executed cardiac procedure. Some hearts once broken become stronger at the fracture line. Mine certainly did. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.